Okay, thank you all for joining us today. And I see a lot of my colleagues, other librarians across the state logging in this morning. So we're so glad to have you. This is part of our Childhood Classics 100 Years of Original Illustration series. And so we have an exhibit currently on display here in Florence at the Kennedy Douglas Center for the Arts. And it's on display through March 25th. So if you have a chance to come visit over the next few weeks, I encourage you to do so. We also have a few pieces here at the Florence Lauderdale Public Library. And this series is co-sponsored by the Kennedy Douglas Trust, the Florence Lauderdale Public Library Foundation, and the Alabama State Council on the Arts. And so today's program is called Censoring Childhood Classics, the Who and the Why, and how timely that topic is right now. So before I introduce our speaker, I did want to share from the exhibit, there is a panel on banned books. So I wanted to share the description from that panel, and then we'll let her get started. So censorship has always been an important topic in publishing and literature, and children's books have not escaped that debate. Libraries and schools have been asked to remove many books from use by young readers by local authorities, parents, and religious groups. Reasons for such a challenge are usually associated with the book's content and whether it is appropriate for a particular age group. Going back to early books such as Little Black Sambo and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, issues of language and racial insensitivity are often cited as reasons for censorship. And for recent books, the issues that arise as problematic include violence, such as Lord of the Flies, use of magic, as in Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, or content that is deemed too sexual in nature, such as Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Illustrations that include nudity, stories with animals displaying human characteristics, and content that addresses our changing society, such as themes of working mothers, gay parents, or interracial relationships, have also been put forward as reasons to challenge books, especially those intended for younger children. Famous picture books that have been censored include In the Night Kitchen, Where the Wild Things Are, Rabbit's Wedding, and even Where's Waldo? In response to the banning of Sylvester and the Magic Pebble, which won the Caldecott Medal, the American Library Association clarified their opposition to all censorship, stating, material should not be prescribed or removed because of partisan or doctrinal disapproval. Libraries should challenge censorship in the fulfillment of their responsibility to provide information and enlightenment. And so today we have with us the perfect speaker for this topic. We have Kristin Pekoll. She is the Assistant Director at the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. She is a former young adult librarian from Wisconsin and a lifelong Green Bay Packers fan who happens to live in Chicago Bears country. She is the author of Beyond Banned Books, Defending Intellectual Freedom Throughout Your Library, which was published by ALA Editions in 2019. And I'll be monitoring the chat, so if anybody has questions as we go, we should have a few minutes at the end for questions, but I'll be monitoring those as we go. So thank you, Kristin, for being here.
Can you guys see my slides?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. Thank you, Abby. And thank you to the Florence Lauderdale Public Library for hosting this program, and to the Kennedy Douglas Center for the Arts for your support, and the amazing exhibit from the Art Kandy Collection of Childhood Classics, 100 Years of Children's Book Illustrations. I wish I was down in Alabama to see it. I worked with the American Library Association for almost 8 years, and I have a passion for intellectual freedom that started much earlier than even when I was a librarian. It started when I developed my insatiable need for books and reading, which started with childhood classics. ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom, or OIF, is charged with implementing ALA policies concerning intellectual freedom as embodied in the Library Bill of Rights. The Library Bill of Rights is the association's core policy on free access to libraries and library materials. The goal of the office is to educate librarians and the general public about the nature and importance of intellectual freedom, privacy, and professional ethics in libraries. We are just one small part of a huge association. According to Webster's Dictionary, To censor means to examine in order to suppress or delete anything considered objectionable. Censorship happens whenever some people succeed in imposing their political or moral values on others by suppressing words, images, or ideas that they find offensive. Censors can be individuals, government entities, but censorship can also be accomplished very effectively by private groups. Not all forms of censorship are illegal. When private individuals agitate to eliminate TV programs they dislike or threaten to boycott the companies that support those programs with advertising dollars, they are certainly trying to censor artistic expression and to interfere with the free speech of others. But their actions are perfectly legal. And in fact, their protests are protected by the First Amendment right of freedom of speech. Not even all government censorship is unlawful. For example, we still have laws against obscenity in art and entertainment. These laws prohibit producing or disseminating material about sex if a judge or jury thinks the material is sufficiently offensive and lacks any serious value. Obscenity can only be determined by a court of law and must consider the whole work and not just a page or an image. The First Amendment is the basis for free expression in the United States. And with free speech comes the freedom to read. The Supreme Court states that there is a First Amendment right to receive information as a corollary to the right to speak. Justice William Brennan elaborated on this point in 1965. The protection of the Bill of Rights goes beyond the specific guarantees to protect from congressional abridgment those equally fundamental personal rights necessary to make the express guarantees fully meaningful. I think the right to receive publications is such a fundamental right. The dissemination of ideas can accomplish nothing if otherwise willing addressees are not free to receive and consider them. It would be a barren marketplace of ideas that had only sellers and no buyers. The First Amendment protects against government restrictions on or interference with the content of speech. The First Amendment applies to the government at the national, state, and the local level. First Amendment freedoms are fragile and targeted by.
You been working this morning?
Yes, ma'am. Let me show you another wall like that.
I just,
First Amendment freedoms are fragile, and they are targeted by increasingly effective and sophisticated attacks. In numerous communities, people are determined to impose their own views on everyone else and censor what they do not approve. The First Amendment exists to protect speech and activities that are unpopular. If only those ideas which were popular were protected, it wouldn't be needed. Censorship is an assault on the rights of all of us, and we must continue to fight for the freedom to read, to see, to know, and to think for ourselves. Every year, ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom releases the top 10 most challenged books during National Library Week in April. We also analyze the past year's data for infographics, outlining where challenges are taking place, who is initiating them, and why. The following infographics are from 2020 reports of censorship. Of the 156 challenges in 2020, 147 of the reports designated who initiated the challenge. This information reflects all kinds of challenges in all types of libraries, whether it's a parent challenging a book in the school curriculum, or a librarian who deselects a book from the public library, or a board member who wants an online resource removed from the public library's website. Here's one significant trend that we noticed in 2020. Because so many schools were providing remote learning and students were participating from home, more parents were witnessing classroom discussions and activities with resources they objected to. This is one of the reasons we see an increase in the percentage of parents challenging resources. Last year, Parents represented 18% of people who initiated challenges. In 2019, 66% of challenges took place in public libraries. In 2020, public libraries are still the highest, but at 43%, it's closer to the 38% of challenges that take place in schools. We credit this in large part to so many public libraries being closed to the public and offering virtual services. Reporting on why a resource is challenged is itself very challenging. Many times there are multiple reasons why a person may object to a resource. Many times the reason stated publicly doesn't address the underlying issues. To produce this infographic, we not only look at how we catalog the reason, but also the exact language that is used in the media, statements to the board, or written on reconsideration forms. In our goal to produce an honest reflection of censorship in the country, we often include phrases directly from the challenge in this infographic. Attempts to censor materials addressing LGBTQIA+ themes and issues is still the most common in 2020. Another trend that we've seen frequently this past year is how race is depicted in books. Many communities are taking a closer look at how collections and curriculum address these issues and attempting to make them more inclusive by removing texts with racist language. Additionally, there are challenges where the reason is centered around objections to anti-racist ideas with theories or stories that include activism. It's a broad range of language. Black Lives Matter, filled with lies, propaganda, emphasis on social justice, political viewpoint, white savior, traumatizing, divisive topics, anti-police, and racist. In 2020, OIF recorded 277 total materials affected by challenges and bans. We count all materials, including books, films, newspapers, magazines, games, and CDs. I'm certain that the numbers are much higher in reality. Books are still the majority of challenges, but while we still see the majority of challenges happening in public libraries, when we analyze the types of challenges and the locations, we found that the majority of book challenges are in school libraries, while the majority of public library challenges are to programs and displays. This year, a significant increase to social media challenges because most public libraries had limited in-person services. There are two numbers in this particular infographic: 156 challenges, 273 books. Some challenges affect more than one material, like a challenge in Louisiana where a board member and the director removed 15 LGBTQIA+ books out of the children's section to appease complaining patrons. And in some case, a challenge affects a service, like a display or a program, and it doesn't affect the total number of materials. On Monday, April 4th, the State of America's Libraries report is released, including the top 10 frequently challenged books of 2021 and all of the corresponding trends for the past year. More than 330 unique cases were reported to ALA's Office for Intellectual Freedom in the 3-month period between September 1st and November 30th, 2021. Thus far, challenge totals in 2021 have doubled the number of reports from 2020, and most likely will outpace 2019 figures, which was 377 challenges. While I doubt any of the following books will be part of the top 10 challenged books in 2021, learning what children's classics were challenged and why is important to understanding the historical arch of censorship. In 1985, In the Night Kitchen by Maurice Sendak was challenged at the Cunningham Elementary School in Beloit, Wisconsin, because the book was believed to desensitize children to nudity. In Sendik's picture book, a young boy named Mickey falls out of his clothes as he travels through his dreams to the magical kitchen of the title. In addition to being challenged, in the night kitchen is frequently defaced by those who objected to Mickey's nudity and drew diapers or pants over the illustrations. The book was published in 1970 by Harper and Row and was awarded the Caldecott Medal in 1971. Sendik's editor, Ursula Nordstrom, gathered hundreds of signatures in defense of the book when the school library journal shared a news item of the book being censored by diapering the boy using paint. In her letter to librarians and professors, publishers, authors, and artists, Nordstrom says, "At first, the thought of librarians painting diapers or pants on the naked hero of Sendik's book might seem amusing, merely a harmless eccentricity on the part of a prim few. On reconsideration, however, this behavior should be recognized for what it is, an act of censorship by mutilation rather than by obvious suppression." A young boy named Max, often dressing in his wolf costume, wreaks havoc through his household and is disciplined by being sent to his bedroom. As he feels agitation with his mother, Max's bedroom undergoes a mysterious transformation into a jungle environment, and he winds up sailing to an island inhabited by malicious beasts known as wild things. It took Maurice Sendak 4 years to get Harper and Row to publish Where the Wild Things Are. One of the most beloved and best-selling children's books of all times almost didn't make it past his editors. They were scared that the unvarnished story of rebellion, fear, punishment, and escape were too much for little children. In 1964, Where the Wild Things Are won the Caldecott Medal for Best Picture Book, and since its publication has sold nearly 20 million copies worldwide. The editors weren't off base though, as the book did frighten people. They just happened to be adults, particularly those living in the South, who immediately began pulling it from libraries and schools. Adding his voice to the outcry was a prominent child psychologist, Bettelheim, who wrote in Ladies' Home Journal, "What Sendak failed to understand is the incredible fear it evokes in the child to be sent to bed without supper, and this by the first and foremost giver of food and security, his mother." Wild Things has been challenged in schools and libraries because of witchcraft, supernatural elements, and unsuited to age group. With his work, Sendak acknowledges darkness and fear and provides an introduction to complicated thinking, the basis for reason, and fundamentally, humanism. The very things that protective censors wish to shield sensitive children from. And for this reason, Where the Wild Things is still, after 30 years, being pulled from schools and libraries, and worse, shunned by overprotective guardians. The National Education Association lists Where the Wild Things Are as one of the teacher's top 100 books for children. Harriet spies, not to solve mysteries, but for the sheer delinquent joy of it. She suits up in a spy uniform of jeans and a sweatshirt, a tool belt with a leather pouch for her notebook, black glasses without lenses, and peers into the windows of her neighborhood on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. And then she writes about them with brutal honesty in big block letters in the notebook she carries wherever she goes. Harriet the Spy was controversial when it came out in the 1960s, in part because Harriet was a very flawed character. Some critics hated the book, and some schools even banned it. Harriet saw too much. She said too much. She even threw temper tantrums and had to visit a psychiatrist. But when you read it from the point of view of a child, you see immediately that Harriet is just pretty exciting. She's a young woman with a really great sense of herself. She even says, "I love myself." And young readers really loved Harriet too. In the 1960s and 70s, young girls formed Harriet the Spy clubs. They dressed up like her and they spied on their parents. Harriet spied for no other reason than the thrill and delinquent pleasure of doing what wasn't supposed to be done by good little girls. Harriet wrote about her adventures and the people and places in her Manhattan setting with a derisiveness that was negative and arrogant, yet so refreshingly hilarious that you're forced to laugh and nod your head in agreement. Not surprisingly, her against the grain attitude has had some people in a frenzy since her first adventure was published in '64, and that led her to being one of the most banned and challenged literary characters of the last half century. The book debuted on 1964 list of the year's best juveniles in the New York Times Best Book Review. One reviewer in 1965 called the book a brilliantly written, unsparingly realistic story, a superb portrait of an extraordinary child, and another found that it captures the feelings, thoughts, and situations of a modern city with remarkable clarity and dimension. Opponents claimed that Fitzhugh was secretly pushing a gay agenda through use of characters like the boy with the purple socks, arguing that he was gay for no other reason than the color purple being associated with the gay community. Harriet's friend Sport is also considered countercultural with 1960s gender norms due to the fact that he cooks, cleans, and carries out other household tasks due to his absentee mother and stay-at-home father. Along with Are You There, God, Blubber, and Where the Sidewalk Ends, the book Harriet the Spy was challenged at a 1983 school board meeting in Ohio. Opponents viewed it as encouraging children to be disrespectful, teaching children to lie, spy, talk back, and curse. The female character of Harriet was believed to be a bad influence on children because of her abrasiveness and improper behavior. But maybe it's because she's flawed that the readers enjoy her still to this day. This fable, the Lorax, isn't subtle, nor should it be. Seuss personifies industry as a whole with the Onceler to draw attention and interest to unchecked corporate greed as a threat to nature. The Lorax sounds the warning siren, but it is ignored as environmental groups often are until it's too late. But industry isn't the sole culprit in this cautionary tale. Industry will only produce what it thinks consumers will buy. So on a certain level, the book is saying that we're all responsible for the fate of the environment. Dr. Seuss goes easy on us in his story, but our complicity is heavily implied. If we as consumers are so easily swayed by the next big thing without regard for how it's made, then this is the world we'll end up with. The Lorax is fairly grim compared to Green Eggs and Ham and the Cat in the Hat, but it reflects the era in which it was written in 1971. The deforestation of the Pacific Northwest was chief among the environmental issues of the time. Logging companies were cutting down trees at alarming rates. Needless to say, the logging company was not happy about the Lorax. The book was challenged in many schools and libraries near thriving timber communities. The timber industry groups even sponsored a rebuttal book called The Truax, which helped kids understand the necessity of harvesting timber. Dr. Seuss's environmental kids book was banned in 1989 in California school because it was believed to portray logging in a poor light and would turn children against the foresting industry. They bought a full-page newspaper ad in which they accused second-grade teachers of brainwashing their children. The Lorax has also been criticized for its excessive portrayal of consumerism. The Onceler represents a greedy America who wants the latest and greatest items, regardless of the consequences. Even though Dr. Seuss himself is regarded with controversy, the Lorax remains a staple, especially during Earth Day. We all know the story of Little Red Riding Hood. This version of the Grimm's fairy tale, written by Tina Hyman, won a Caldecott Honor Award for Children's Literature in 1984. The challenge came because Little Red has a bottle of wine in her basket, promoting alcohol to minors. In 1990, 2 school districts in the state of California banned the book Little Red Riding Hood because of the bottle of wine in her basket. An Associated Press article quotes the assistant superintendent that the inclusion of wine in the book gives the younger ones the wrong impression about alcohol. If they should refrain, why give them a book saying it's okay? She was worried about lines in the book that said, the grandmother drank some of the wine, and after a while, the grandmother felt quite strong and healthy and began to clean up the mess that the wolf had left in its cottage. Jashani, who ordered the ban, said it was more the final paragraph of the story that seals the deal for her decision. The part after the woodsman kills the big bad wolf. A teacher at Linwood Elementary School organized a day-long protest over the ban. At the same time in Florida's Bedford, Clay, and Levy counties, schools received complaints that the wolf was too scary. In those cases, parents or teachers challenged the books, but administrators took no action to ban them. A school in Spain has withdrawn from its library 200 classic children's books, such as Sleeping Beauty and Little Red Riding Hood, because of their depictions of sexist stereotypes. After analyzing the contents of its library for children up to age 6, the administration found that around a third of its stories were toxic. Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark is a 3-volume set of haunting folklore collected from around the world, all retold by the author Alvin Schwartz. Featuring nightmarish illustrations by Stephen Gammell, winner of the Caldecott Medal. Scary Stories tells tales like Wonderful Sausage, where a butcher kills his wife, grinds her up into sausage, and then sells her to his drooling patrons. Some parents were appalled, even comparing Schwartz to the cannibalistic serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer. Nancy Allen, a Kirkland mom, seized the Scary Stories from the elementary library, and the president of the PTA had some 70 parents and teachers sign a petition demanding the book's removals, and soon the story spread. Parents said they're just too gruesome for young readers. But gruesome wasn't the only word used to describe Schwartz's books. Devil, seance, witchcraft, and occult were heard at PTO meetings across the country. Vanderburg continued her protest, even appearing on Good Morning America. According to the American Library Association, Scary Stories is the most challenged book of the 1990s. In discussing Gammell's illustrations, Paul Zielinski, also an illustrator and Caldecott Medal winner, says he has a really good grip on the way textures can trigger fear. He draws very carefully. The edges are sharp mostly, but his work is also indefinite. The Scary Stories series would be challenged time and again, beating out Maya Angelou's I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Mark Twain's The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, and John Steinbeck's Of Mice and Men to become the 3 most challenged books of the decade. Each book mentioned challenged for alcohol, scariness, environmental issues, disobedient behavior, and nudity may be found offensive by one person and adored by another. And that's the glory of being able to read without restriction and find out for yourself. There are 2 ways of approaching and protecting books in schools There are two ways of approaching protecting books in schools and libraries, locally and wider. Locally, pay attention to your school board, your library board, and your city council. Where and when do they regularly meet? Where can you find the minutes from previous meetings and know where to find agendas as well as board packets? Many of these boards record their meetings, so bookmark the live streams or archives. Keep up with your local newspaper if you have one. If you don't have one, learn who covers your community for regional papers or national bureaus. These reporters are always seeking the stories that matter, so utilize them as resources. And vote. It's simple and straightforward. Local elections matter. And in many places, library boards and school boards are elected positions. Know who is on the ballot and ask them questions at open forums or via their social media and websites. Ask them where they stand on censorship and the rights of a community to access the information they desire. Serve on your local school, library, or city council boards. For appointed positions, apply for them, and for elected positions, run. Every civil body operates differently, so get to know how those positions work and how often you're expected to attend meetings. Show up to those meetings. Open comments from the public are given space at civic meetings. And this is crucial because people who have a problem are the ones who always show up. People who are happy or unaware of how things are going do not show up. Your comments do not need to be scripted or deep. Simply taking 10 minutes of your evening to show up and tell the council you're happy with how the library has such a great collection, or the children's programming in the school library has been appreciated and is doing their work. These comments not only remind gatekeepers of the power of their job, but those boards hear and see that too. Write letters. Email your city council, email your library administration, email the school librarian. Tell them that you love what they're doing and why. These letters matter. Talk to the newspaper. Write letters to the editor extolling the virtues of the library. Again, the majority of voices on these letters to the editor page are unhappy people. They rarely are people who are happy. Add a voice of praise and do it often. It's as simple as sending a quarterly or monthly alert to spend 5 minutes praising and writing and sending it through the paper submissions. To be invested in the wider climate of censorship and protecting the First Amendment, follow news and social media in your state and nationally. Keep apprised of organizations both working to censor and working to defend library or school materials. OIF publishes and emails a weekly list of censorship around the country. Anyone can sign up. Educate friends, neighbors, and family members about censorship and how it harms communities. Join and support organizations like the Freedom to Read Foundation. Attempts to ban books rarely succeed when people speak out against them. And most importantly, read banned books and think for yourself. Do not take for granted the freedoms given to you. The fact is, those working to actively censor materials are working to take your freedoms away. And I just put a link in there for different questions and resources that are available. Does anybody have any questions at all?
Hi, I have a question. So we're starting to see, I work at a public library, we're starting to see a lot more challenges that aren't necessarily asking the book to be removed from the collection or like out of the library system, but that they are not age appropriate and need to be moved into, say, the teen area or the adult collection when the book is written for children. And we're seeing a lot more of those type of challenges, not necessarily just fully removing it from the library. Have you seen anything like that or have suggestions on how to have those conversations?
Absolutely. And I think that's part of the reason that even with challenges like that, to go through the process of reconsideration and have it be evaluated. There are times when we've seen where it's a legitimate issue where, you know, a young adult graphic novel is erringly put into a juvenile graphic novel collection or something like that. And after some consideration and reviewing it, they think with the reviews that it should be in the
For sure.
collection. And so we do things on a case-by-case basis. But when the intent is to hide or censor something because they don't want people to find it, the thinking by putting it in the adult collection, even though it's a children's picture book, they're going to hide it so that it doesn't find its target audience. We do have some resources that talk about that within the Library Bill of Rights and the interpretations, and we can provide some guidance on why we think, you know, different collections are meant for different audiences. And even if that book isn't to your taste or your family's taste, it might be to others. And so there's some good resources there. But yeah, we try to provide guidance as to why things should stay in their intended collections.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Are there questions in the room?
Were
Okay,
you surprised by any of the books mentioned?
I'm sorry, what?
I was just wondering if anybody was surprised by any of the books that were mentioned that were challenged.
I'm not. I mean, we're used to seeing a lot of challenged books.
has the Giving Tree ever been challenged? We have a question about it.
Yes, definitely. And I almost put that one in my slides. There were challenges to the Giving Tree because it was I'm missing my word. I'd have to go back and look at it. It's let me do a stop share here. In 1988, it was banned in Colorado because people believed it was sexist. Some readers believed that the young boy continually taking from a female tree without ever giving anything in return. A number of Shel Silverstein's books have been challenged.
And we have another question.
She commented that usually speak up for people who are not things that are out there and want things censored. I'm not happy that in school, things that aren't necessarily factual. I saw something about that as far as slavery goes, where they commented in a history book that if a person was a Christian, then that slave might be treated better than one that was not a Christian. I wonder why we don't speak out about things like that more often and demand that things that are being taught be actually actual. Or is there any kind of effort to see that?
A comment, I guess, asking if there is an effort in schools to make sure that students are being taught factually and not information that may be sort of subjective. And how do we speak out about that?
I think there really is. I see a lot of teachers doing instruction on media literacy and understanding when a particular resource might have a bias to it, and how to not necessarily discount things because of a bias, but take that into consideration when evaluating the information. And I think from a lot of different resources, you're going to get people that say, well, this is the truth. But how do we come to that agreement necessarily? So yeah, I think there's a lot of people teaching media literacy nowadays, and there's some great documentaries that are out about it. And librarians and teachers really take that into consideration when they're doing lessons on that.
Question about the books in the school, which is a little bit different topic, but very valid. Doesn't the State Board of Education deem what's appropriate to be used in the schools in Alabama anyway?
Does the state, could you hear that?
A little bit, yeah.
Just asking if the State Board of Education deems what's appropriate to be taught or not, and how that may vary from state to state.
Yeah, it really does vary from state to state as far as the role of the State Board of Education. And what is taught in schools is very different than what is housed in a school library. And so it definitely, I think that the state school boards will often provide standards that are adopted and that have to be implemented in each individual school district as far as curriculum goes. But there's a lot of, especially when you have English classes where they're doing, group reads or maybe different novel studies, different genres, things like that. There's a little bit more flexibility to what's in the curriculum than when you're talking about social studies and science. And then even more broad is what's in a school library, because we have to take into consideration not only what's in the curriculum and supporting those resources, but also those school library principles of lifelong learning and building students to be a love of reading, and also developing themselves emotionally and growing as global citizens. So those kind of aspects take into consideration a little bit more than curriculum.
Yes.
Political pushback regarding the board of trustees of public libraries and whether or not they try to get involved in what is selected by the library staff to go in that library.
Can you repeat that one, Abby?
Pushback with library board of trustees and what role they should play in book selection versus staff selecting materials.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a fine line, but I did have to look at some more of my actual resources, but United for Libraries, which is one of the ALA divisions that talks about trustees and friends and governing bodies, they talk about the day-to-day operations of ordering and building collections that should stay with professional staff, and that it is the role of the public library board to guide them in policy making that then ultimately shapes those collections. A lot of reconsideration policies will have the board be the final step in whether or not a book is retained. And that's more of a reflection on democracy, because they are usually elected officials or somehow appointed by an elected official that therefore can make a decision in a local community. So it's kind of democracy based. But usually with really great training and advocacy, the library board and the professional staff have a great working relationship, and they understand those underlying principles of intellectual freedom and the profession selection that's happening, and can make sure that those books are retained when they are fall within the selection policy, and aren't using their personal biases to remove any books.
Hi, this is Mary in Pelham. How do you explain to someone who might be upset that the library says they cultivate a large collection for the community at large, et cetera, to defend our like LGBTQ books or books on race in America, but then want to know, well, does that mean that you have books that are maybe Holocaust denial or things like that, like that, or that might advocate violence. Like, should we have everything, or how do we explain to them that there are some things that may not be appropriate?
That's a really great question. And you're talking about public libraries, correct?
Yes, public.
So in certain situations, and it really is on a case-by-case basis, because you want to also consider, how, who the person is when you're having these conversations and thinking about things, but listening to their concerns in the first place. And instead of trying to refute what they're saying, like these things shouldn't be in the library, you talk about why we prioritize things in the library. And so in a lot of cases, public libraries don't carry Holocaust denial books because the general consensus is that they're not true, and that there isn't a need for them. Most patrons don't need to read them. So there's a very limited amount of demand for things like that. And so just kind of talking about using the taxpayer dollars in the most efficient and cost-effective way by providing materials that are unstandard, like culturally understood and meant to be. There's a really good phrase that my director, Deborah Caldwell Stone, uses. It's like the understood norm, like this is accepted. Like you might still find a book out there that just questions whether, in fact, actually it's not too off of there. There are people who believe that the earth is flat, right? That's a thing, but it's generally not accepted. So we don't purchase a lot of books in a public library about flat earthers. So
yeah, I've found that a lot of times the people who ask those questions, they're not really doing so in good faith.
mm-hmm.
That it isn't a real question. It's more just kind of a gotcha situation.
Right.
So we're currently facing, they haven't become full-blown challenges yet, but I'm just waiting on forms to come in. So we've got a couple of different things going on here. So just preparing.
Yeah, please reach out and let us know. I didn't really use this in my slides, but I usually push a lot about reporting censorship and letting us know how we can help you. And if it's even just knowing about it and being a place where you can talk and get advice.
Thank you. It's appreciated.
Are there any other questions?
I just want to say I'm a retired librarian. I started 50 years ago, and I just want to applaud ALA and intellectual freedom for what you have all done. Thank you.
Thank you. That is very touching to hear. I appreciate it. Censorship is skyrocketing right now, and one of my jobs is to listen and talk to the librarians who are going through it every single day. And where I might have gotten 3 to 5 calls a week, now I'm getting 5 to 8 calls a day, and it can take a toll, not only on the librarians but on myself as well. But just going through it, it's really hard. It's a hard thing to go through right now. So just sharing that support is really, really helpful to hear. Thank you.
Welcome.
I think that's a great comment to end on. So thank you, Kristin, so much for speaking to us today. And thank you for everyone for attending. And we hope you have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.